This.
I'm gonna take off when you guys start talking. You feel better? What's that?
Catch up and have a beer.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Everybody go ahead and get started. I did bring up. Find a seat.
I got a couple weeks. Good. How are you? 10 pounds. Once that's done, got more free time into it.
Good to see you, Jeff.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, no, that was reinsurance.
So you were just gonna like fire off if they have any questions?
Yeah, I'll look at the online chat if they have any questions.
Okay.
We're gonna go get started. Everyone can write down. I just want to welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out to the Angular meetup. Sorry we had to postpone last week, though we wanted to make sure everyone got home safe, didn't get stuck in the weather or anything like that. But let's go and get started. Kevin and Jeff are here to talk about making a secure Angular application. So.
Yes, thank you guys for giving us a little bit of a delay because it was pretty damn icy where I was. Hopefully you guys didn't drive all the way in here. Did you? My name's Kevin Grossman-Klaus. This is Jeff St. Germain. We're from ArchitectNow. We're going to talk tonight and give a demo of a site and talk security around Angular. So you're going to hear a lot of different ways we do it. You're going to see one very specific example using Identity Server on the back end. We're a Microsoft shop, so you're going to see some code that's in CSharp and some server-side stuff tonight. When you talk about security with Angular, there's security and the client server go together. We're using a third-party open source tool, Jeff will show you, called Identity Server to be our auth. It's going to serve up it's our OAuth server. We're going to authenticate against it. We're going to authorize for it. Everything you're going to see tonight would work if you used Facebook or Google or anything else for that component or any other third-party server to do that. We build all kinds of apps. Some we do this, some we have custom. If we have time in the end, and if you want to see it, I can break my laptop out and show you some custom. When I say custom, do I recommend go do it custom versus use a third-party, more reliable auth server? If you have access to one of those, do that, like you're going to see. That said, sometimes we still have customers that have their own user database and their own hashed passwords. We still write a backend against that, and we generate JavaScript web tokens or JAP tokens and do everything else the same. So you're going to see security modules, you're going to see .NET server-side code, you're going to see how we secure routes, how we store that stuff and send up bear tokens in HTTP. If you're new to Angular, there's going to be a lot of stuff here that's probably pretty advanced. If you're familiar with Angular, we're using Angular 5, current Angular as of a couple days ago. All the code that you're going to see tonight is in a GitHub repo. We're happy to share it with you. You can look through it. Jeff here is a web designer, so he makes his demos are a lot prettier than my demos. He's also a CrossFit guy, so you're going to see a CrossFit. I am not a CrossFit guy, so my demos are beer, his are CrossFit. He's also a beer drinker, though. Fact. This is informal. How many of you have been here before? Everyone? None? Few of you? Yeah, the rest of you, I assume, are new. This is a very informal event. We've spoken here in the past, so if you have a question, raise your hand, just yell out, and we'll do our best to stop and answer them. We share our contact info. Please write us if you have questions after this. But other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he can share the nitty-gritty details, and I'll pitch in as we go.
Yeah, so as Kevin alluded to, I work for him. And, you know, like he said, I like beer, volleyball, and CrossFit, and not really in any order. I can mix and match and do them together, too. So just because I do CrossFit doesn't mean I don't drink and have fun. So what we're going to discuss today, and this is just real quick, and I hate reading over bullet points, but we're going to go over Identity Server 4 at a high level. If you want to dig deeper, raise your hand and we can dig deeper into it. But I want to show it to you just because it'll give you an idea of how things are configured on an OAuth perspective, right? And how they're how the inner workings might be happening. So you might understand if you're using a Google or a Microsoft, what they are doing really on the back end. We're going to go over a secure API server, the general setup for it against the identity server, and using JWT tokens to be the identity and the authentication. And then we have a secure client portal that's going to be using a third-party NPM package. This is when I say client portal, this is the Angular site, right? It's going to be using the Angular OAuth2 OpenID Connect NPM package. It's the one I found that I like the best. It was easy to configure, get it up and running against the identity server, and minimal setup, right? Auth service, we're going to centralize, talk about centralized security. So an auth service in Angular, we're going to HTTP intercept to do bearer tokens, and I'll show you all this. Create authorization and authentication guards, and a directive to lock down components, and then extra if we have, I can show you. I created a session service using observables to check for people activity on the site and time you out if you're sitting on the site too long, and log you out if you're not doing anything. So the authentication flow with any, let's say you have your, I'm going to dial back before I get to this. We're talking about securing a single page application, and I just want to put it out there that you cannot secure a single page application. You are handing the end user your entire source code, right? So if I have an Angular app, I'm handing him JavaScript that I wrote that's basically my source code, right? So when we're talking about securing an Angular app, what we're really talking is hiding or manipulating the code so that the user experience is that they don't see what they shouldn't, quote unquote, see. But anybody who's good could go in and manipulate that JavaScript and get what they wanted to out of it, right? So if you have a site where you don't care that you're sending data down that maybe this person's not going to see or shouldn't see, but there's nothing really overly secure that if he got to it and he's not going to get any sensitive data out of it, fine, send it down. Another talk would be how to secure it on the server side, so you never send them the code, right? After they log in, you verify their role and only send them the modules down or the code down that they have access to. So they can never actually get that code from the server, right? So you're not sending them JavaScript that they shouldn't have access to. So with that being said, we'll move on into the authentication flow. So basically the client would come in, go to the site, and I'm going to demo all this, go to the Angular application. The first step, the site is going to automatically assume that they're anonymous and redirect them all the way to the authentication server. We're going to skip over the API server altogether and land on a page on the identity server. The identity server is going to basically just show you a login screen, and you will log in. It will authenticate the client being where you came from, what scopes you're requesting, any APIs you're requesting, whether or not you have the refer in your header to make sure that you're coming from where you say you're coming from. It'll authenticate all of that. And then authenticate the user after they hit their password, sign in, verify that they have rights to even access that client, right? If they don't, just send them back saying you can't log in. It's kind of like you would say, I have rights to Outlook and Microsoft, but I didn't sign up for Azure Portal, so if I go to Azure Portal, they're going to want to authenticate me against that. So then after all that happens, it sends you back a token. And in this case, we're talking about OpenID Connect flow, not OAuth server-to-server communications. We're talking about over HTTP, okay? So it'll send you back that token in the URL. The Angular app will then grab that token, validate it using its own JWT validator, and then store the token, log you in, send you to the next page where the flow would be from this point. Once you're successfully authenticated, you have an ID token and an auth token. Every request now is being sent with that bearer token from the Angular app back now to the API server. The API server will check to make sure that you have the roles that it needs, right? So if you're in the correct role, you can pass to the next check, which is send it over to the identity server, and the identity server will validate the token itself to make sure nobody's tampered with it. If it's tampered with, then back it goes, and you get a 401 or a 403. If you have a valid token, it goes back, and you get the response data back from the API with your 200 OK or 204 no content, right? And then the last step would be sign out. Same thing, you would clear out your session on the Angular app, clean up anything you need from there, call the sign out from the third-party package. It would send you over to the identity server. The identity server will clean out any cookies, whatever, and then sign you out and then redirect you back to the client, which would then take you back to the very beginning, which you'd basically redirect around a few times and end up back on the client side. Okay, so
the goal of all this is, to what he said earlier, when you build a single page app, whether you React, Angular, any technology you're using, your code is all going to go down to the server, but the data, the API calls, that whole interaction for your single page app calling your server, that's what we're securing. We're forcing you to authenticate where you go somewhere and log in. As part of that login process, you get back a token that says you're good, and it's this big, long, encrypted thing. You keep that around while your app is running in the browser. Every time you make another call in the API, in addition to whatever parameters you're sending to this next API call, you have to include that token. You include it he uses the term a bearer token. It's an HTTP header with the word bearer in front of it. It's the OAuth standard for how that's done. The server, that whole API server talking to an identity server, that whole server-side thing that you're setting up. But what that is it's one thing to just send a valid token. It's another thing for the server to say, okay, the token's valid, and I decrypted it, and I looked at it, and the user is still good. They didn't leave their browser open for 2 weeks while they got fired. They got removed from our database over here. They're no longer a valid user because we've done our due diligence in Google. They come back and refresh. That token, while legitimately good data, is for a user that is no longer a user, no longer has the right to roll this. We're using identity server as this. It's identity server as a package. He's going to run at the console out here, so you can see it sitting in the console. But in the real world, we have a small website sit out there that's our identity server. We also have a website that sits out there that's our APIs. In our world, we also have a third website that is simply static content, which is the index.html comes from the third website. It's our full single page app. And the API calls the little one, identity server, this one. We make a call to an API, it's the API server that comes to the identity server. Identity server, as I'll show you, is also, when we use this third-party identity server, it's responsible for some of the UIs in terms of logging in. It has its own, it renders the HTML and markup for the username and password. And log out to other. It doesn't have a significant amount of UI in it, but there's some user-related UIs.
So what I was doing there was just making sure my Docker instance was running, because I'm running SQL locally as a backing store for the identity server. And it failed, and it keeps failing. And we may not be able to run this, and I don't know why. I'm able to start Kestrel. Oh, I have it open somewhere. All right. Where do I have it open? That's a good question.
You'll notice, I don't know what you guys use, we tend to use MacBooks. We tend to use all of them. Odd for me to say that all my new employees for the last 6 or so months, not one of them even have. When we use SQL Server for the back end, we use Docker on that. We use Writer, as JetBrains Writer is our CSharp .NET IDE. We use Redux by JetBrains for the studio code. For our Angular TypeScript.
There we go.
No, it's kind of weird.
So in this window, this is a .NET Core 2 app running on the Mac. That's running the identity server on port 4000. In this window, we have the API server, right, that is running on localhost port 4001. And on our Angular side, we're running on port 4002. So just to give you a quick demo, you'll see original 4002 website, and then immediately was bounced and redirected to the 4000 URL. And in the query string is all of the data that the Angular OpenID Connect 2 library passed along to the identity server so it can validate, right? So then after I sign in, it redirects back, and this is that whole flow I was talking about, and now I'm logged in and I have access to the whole site, right? So I just wanted to demonstrate that flow and how it's working and how you're getting redirected back and forth between the identity server, which would be, in my case, I own it and I wrote it. And in any other case, you could use Facebook, Google, whoever you want as your identity server. And once you're authenticated, store the tokens and continue on.
Has anyone here ever built an app that uses third-party auth, like a Gmail or Facebook or Twitter? Similar deal, right? You go to them, you log in, you create an app in their dashboard, you give it some unique identifier. That's your scope. And then when you log in with that, it'll redirect you over there. Or if you've already done so, it'll just find the cookie and automatically it already has the right token. It'll still redirect you over there very quickly, but identify that that cookie exists and the token is all good and send you back. So you're only forced to do that actual login the first time or until your cookie expires.
Right. So in the case of OpenID, your identity tokens are very, very short-lived, right? Because you can't, like I said, you can't guarantee that this person's who they are. So your identity tokens really only live for 300 seconds. It's very short. So basically, after a while, you'll see this thing while it's sitting here. It'll go refresh silently the token behind the scenes because your identity token was about to expire. So it's going to go check and say, hey, I need a new one for another 300 seconds. But what I wanted to show you is in the console here, I've kind of logged all the stuff. And you'll get back and you can parse all these things out. The claims that you get from the token, right? And the roles. And I have 2 roles here, and these will come into play later, and I'll talk about those. And you can see I've kind of just logged out all these OAuth OpenID events to show you kind of the flow and what's happening with that login. So any questions so far? Yeah.
So variables means the client.
Right. So in this case, we're using implicit flow, which is the OpenID Connect flow. There is not a client secret, right? And that's when I can't give a client secret to a JavaScript because now they have my secret, right? So I can't do that. So what I have to do is basically give up a little bit of security and say that I'm going to shorten the life of these tokens and just re-verify that this person is who they say they are. Lock down the site by like you saw, the URL, where it's coming from, the scopes you're allowed to get. So they have to get all of this stuff right in order to even start the login process, and then have a username and password, and then get a token, right? So there isn't a client secret in this case.
We still
Right.
use client secrets for some other APIs, not for our own security.
You could have a public key, right? Like a public key, but in this case, we don't need one with the implicit flow because we're doing OpenID. We're just using the username and password as the public key.
You give the identity server username and password to each user to force that step to happen. But for other APIs where there is a public key, we don't actually embed the secrets into our JavaScript. We don't put it in TypeScript anywhere. Instead, one of our first API calls out to the server is to get system settings, and part of that would be in secrets. So if we're secure and we're HTTPS, things like that, somebody could watch traffic and go look at in-memory or local session without it. It's at least not embedded into the JavaScript.
Right.
Would you be able to increase font size just a little?
I don't know. I've never tried that.
And I think it's, I don't know about that console.
Just put you can put focus in it.
Focus and
Command
control.
plus.
Yeah, Command plus. I think it's any screen you can put
Aha!
focus in.
Learn something new every day. So,
So you put a lot of console logs. in these
Yeah, just
show different steps.
to show what's really going on.
God bless you, brother.
Now those will come out if you go to production mode. So is there anything in particular you wanted to see? Or? Yeah. Yeah, so it's just and remember when I talked about the silent refresh? That all just happened and you didn't even know it happened, right? It just went back to the server, got a new token, and extended the life of the app. So
the silent refresh is a part of the OpenID
library
standard,
right.
But he's using an NPM package that does it for us. We didn't go invent all this. We pulled this into an Angular app. It's a module. We wrapped it in another module.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just kind of does it behind the scenes. It handles getting the token, it handles going off. It will make it'll handle all the communication with any OpenID standard identity. And again, he just has his own running console, but if it was third party, you can pull the same library in. It would do everything. It would do the auto refreshes. It would give you access and you put the token in.
Right. Okay.
So when you get this token, when you say look at a refresh, is the original token not yet expired, right? And so is it still valid?
It won't be for long.
It won't be for long. I think it's within 5 seconds.
Oh, within 5 seconds?
Yeah. I think that's what this one's configured to do. Within 5 seconds, it'll try and go get a new one. And you can adjust the time. You could say if it's within 10 seconds, like if you have low latency on your network or whatever, and it's going to take a long time to go do that traffic, you can adjust that to be every 30 seconds before it expires or whatever.
Both of them are valid for a
short period of time. Like if you extend that time, then whatever that time it takes to go out and get that new one, before it comes back, it's still valid. Once that one is refreshed, the other one's invalidated.
Oh, it is invalid.
Yeah. So it's a very short window. So the expiry would be every 5 seconds, 5 seconds before, but that token would only be valid until the other one is refreshed. And you're only refreshing the identity token. You're not refreshing the authorization token. There's 2 tokens that come back. You have one that says, this is who you say you are, and the other one is, this is what you can do, right? And this is what you can do is the one you're going to be passing to back to the API server as a bearer token.
So we have a question online.
Yeah.
Are we implicitly refreshing the token? And if so, what would be the default life of the token, and what will be the interval refresh?
So the default life of an identity token, I think, is 300 seconds.
It's configurable though.
It's configurable. Yeah, we leave it as the default. So whatever the default is for the OpenID Connect protocol.
We are not implicitly doing the library kind of does it.
Right.
For those of you that aren't familiar with that, think of how just a general web app. You log into a web app and then you stay logged in, right? A lot of times, so we've all done this throughout the years in various ways, right? You write a cookie out there that says Joe's logged in, and you never. And if Joe goes to lunch and comes back and the cookie's expired, it takes you back to the login page. Nobody likes that, right? They want to be secure, but they don't want to log in every 5 minutes. So we slide expiration, do all these crazy things where the industry's kind of evolved into this type of setup where you authorize yourself, you log in, you get a token. And then behind the scenes, we keep sending that token back up and we wait 300 seconds. At 255 seconds, we send that token and say, is this guy still good? Because I'm not going to make him log in because they don't like that. Instead, the system's just going to keep re-authoring the token. So the assumption is you can remember your own password. But what I don't want to have happen is somebody in the back end has denied you access, right? There's a secure system. Your boss, say you rage quit, you take your laptop and run out the door, your boss deletes you from the database. You do that, say an employee does it, you delete it from the database because you run out in the parking lot, get Wi-Fi, and their cookie's still good. In this scenario, it would automatically, as soon as they're online, it would recheck their token. If the token comes back bad in one of those refreshes or silent refreshes, it redirects them to login. So it could be 300 seconds. You get a valid account, you log in, great, 300 seconds go by. In that interval, you get access removed for whatever reason, you go back to the login. So it's a very short window of time. Yeah. In that window of time, you still have rights to make API calls because you're sending the other piece up as your bearer token.
Right, and you'll see I just want to kind of show the example of, whoops.
So if you authenticate and you just leave the browser open for a day without touching it, you still going to be logged in.
That identity token, well, assuming I didn't time you out and kill your session, yeah. As long as it sits there and you allow that to happen, yeah.
So how is that related to refresh token for offline?
So in the OpenID Connect world, there is no such, you cannot refresh an identity token or an auth token. You have to basically go request a new one with a valid one, right? There isn't a concept in the OAuth2 protocol where I can say, hey, go get me a new one from a refresh site, but the idea is similar, right? But the concepts are different. But this is the auth, not the identity token, but the auth token that comes back, and then we send with every API request up to the API server that gets validated through that flow we talked about earlier. And then this allows you to have access. So any other questions before I go on into just a high level? And if you want to go deeper into identity server, let me know, I can, but we'll just go as a high level.
How many of you are done that? If a bunch of you didn't raise your hands, what do you do? Yeah. We have remembered all kinds of.
We have our own homegrown solution for our identity server.
In Java, what do you use for your API? Okay. Guess there's all kinds. Is it Spring?
Spring.
Okay.
All right. So you're familiar with Java, then you'll C# looks a lot like Java. We just don't have. It actually looks more like TypeScript than it does look like C#. So, so this is the startup file for a .NET Core application, and basically what this is before we even get the site running, we're going to start a bunch of stuff up and configure a bunch of stuff.
So identity server is
.NET Core. So
it's classic ASP. It's evolved over time. The current version is .NET.
there's like a GitHub plugin for it somewhere.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
source.
yeah.
It's very
open
adopted.
source. Microsoft actually funded these guys on the back end, right, and gave them early access to the .NET Core release cycle so that they could stay in lockstep with the .NET Core releases because they're really pushing towards people using identity server. Yeah, yeah. We can do multiple sessions.
Like opening multiple tabs if you're storing
do it.
Yes, you could. So in this scenario, I store the token response in session. So if the session dies out, you're basically out. So if you open a new tab, you get a new session. No, but could I switch it to use local storage? Yeah, right. And then so any tab you open would have access to local storage, and the library, the OpenID library that you import has, you can tell it what to use session storage or local storage. It's up to you. It just depends on where you want to stick it.
Some don't.
Yeah.
And we can log in multiple times. Local storage works. So you can configure that. Nothing we're doing, we're not using any cookies, anything like that. So this is all in memory. If we could use cookies, I guess.
Yeah, and there's a way to lock, like put an Angular site inside an MVC core site and then lock it down with a cookie based on identity server, but we're not going to talk about that here. So, but there are ways to do it, and you could wrap it up inside a Java site, I'm sure, and do the same thing.
Before you look at this code, switch back over to your Solution Explorer. All this code is available. We'll show where it is on GitHub.
Solution Explorer.
Minimize this to projects.
This?
No, just shrink it down to your project so it shows the projects.
Sure.
So we've got 4 projects.
Ignore this one.
Yeah.
So those are.
We've got a few in shared where he just broke out some of the data access. That's just standard .NET stuff. Models, like what the user looks like. The APIs are all in the first one. AMRAMs, if you're, I guess I'll let Jeff. What is the acronym?
AMRAPs, as many reps as possible.
As many reps as possible in the I knew you
CrossFit term.
I didn't want to be the only one that asked. So the API is a standard .NET Core API that's under APIs. The identity server project, AMRAPs.identity, this is the identity. You go in there and look at NuGet. There is a NuGet package under, it is called identity server. If you're a .NET person, you understand that's how NuGet is the .NET package management. Like NPM is for the web and all web-based stuff, NuGet is for all managed code and .NET world. Identity Server 4 is the version we're looking at. The example he's giving is using SQL Server for its data storage. There's also, he's got the Identity Server 4 identity framework. That's the SQL Server backend.
Yeah, here, I want to do this.
You can use Mongo. There's backends for, you can write your own backends. It's just a set of interfaces. So if you had your own user database that you wanted to plug into, you could. Identity Server makes very little, it specifies very little as to how your data is stored. You can plug in. You have to, just sucking in the package did not write all this code. He'll show you had to write your repository for loading clients, loading users, logging user in, certain things like that. You have to provide your. So you could easily wrap anything that you currently have in terms of a database in this and take advantage of this whole server and all the plumbing that it gives you for doing all the security stuff while still maintaining the data structures that you have.
Right. So we're just at a high level, and again, if you want me to go deeper, just ask. Essentially, all we're doing here when we're configuring the identity server is saying, what are the endpoints on my side, on the identity server side, that I'm going to be using for login and log out?
Those are the user interfaces. The
right.
server has to be configured to provide those UI. They are not.
And this is more SQL specific stuff here, but we're going to configure it to use that SQL database. I want to use this particular schema in SQL so that if I need to, you know, my DBA says I need a different schema so I can lock it down. You can lock it down. And then what we're doing down here for identity server is breaking the code. We're adding a client store, and a client store are your applications that you want to call into and authenticate against. So in my case, it would be the AMRAP site, or it could be a mobile site. So you can specify multiple clients to authenticate against one backing identity store, right? So if you're for lack of a better company, you're Bullhorn, right? And you want to have several different apps and isolate each one of them with different identity. You'd have one identity store that would have separate from any of your apps. You wouldn't have any users in that app. They would just authenticate against this. So
Microsoft is OpenID was an example earlier where you have one Microsoft account. Microsoft is kind of screwed because now they have one general account, one Microsoft account. They license Office 365 that way. You might log in Azure that way. You might log in SharePoint that way. Those different things are the different clients. You have one user account, which might be granted access to Office 365, but you might not have access to an Azure. If you do, if you go request access, all it does is associate your existing user with that client. So if you want to set up in your world, taking a bunch of VMs, one VM is your identity server. You could use that identity server for 10 different apps. And those apps are with the term they use as clients.
So
they just have one client.
Yeah, they just use client. So the one thing I want to point out here is in this configuration, I have one called AMRAPS portal that I'm just storing up here. And when a user or the site comes in, it will automatically try, the identity server will automatically try to find that client in the backing store in the database by the client ID. In this case, the client ID is this, right? So if it finds it, we return it. If not, I go and create it. So we always ensure that we have the client in the database.
You see the term store here? That some of you may think of that as a repository. That's just the data access wrapper. There's a specific interface.
Yeah. And so basically this, yeah, and the identity server is very particular about how things work. So if you try to get to it without requesting a certain scope or adding a certain URL, or if the URL is off by just one letter, you just won't be able to sign in. You'll see I have some of this like pre-configured stuff, and basically this is so if I deploy to a stage environment, I get the stage URLs. If I deploy to a production environment, I get the production URLs. It's, you know, I'm not trying to hide anything. It's just that I can just have one set of code base and then deploy this out to different environments. So the redirect URLs, the sign in OpenID, that is coming from that NPM package, and so is this one, right? And then the post logout, where do we go? How do we sign out? What CORS origins are we allowing? So if you are trying to hit this without that origin, the whole thing would bomb on you. And another scope that I added, the portal API scope, to lock down this particular set of APIs, right? So this set of APIs is for this portal. I can lock those down with this scope. These are scopes, right? These are the allowed scopes. So if you tried to ask for more scopes than I'm allowing you to have, then you wouldn't be able to log in, right?
And you can lock it down and say only allow people to authenticate coming from using that. You use that. Right. But if you're using this privately in your own apps, you know the root URLs of your own apps, you can lock it down and say everything else is going to work as is, but if anybody tries to authenticate and their source URL is not one of these, don't allow it.
It was CORS that just get in.
Right.
It was with scopes that could get in and get back.
Yeah. And so the other parts of this are the profile service, which is, let's see if I remember what this is. It's just getting the user profile, adding claims back to the user profile, and adding and shipping those out. So building the claim set for the token. And then the resources is basically all of the resources that you want to lock down. So in this case, I have to identify that I want to use OpenID, email, and those have to match with the other thing, the other configuration. And here's a Portal API resource. Like I said, I'm going to gloss over this really quick. And then these are my permissions, right, that I'm going to allow in this application. So if somebody tried to use a different permission or a new permission, we would have to add those. Questions? I'm sure you have a lot.
This is all setup stuff.
Yeah,
And
setup.
we wanted to show more Angular side of it, so we spend
I'm just going real quick.
identity. So it does a ton for you. If you've ever written all this, you're probably looking and say, hey, you do that. And you know what? It has its own. Go back and show your, go back to the register. And just to show them the storage or the register stores. Just to show you how.
Oh, stores? Client stores?
Startup.
Yeah, the client store?
No,
Or
go to startup, where you register.
Yeah.
One of the things at ASP.NET Identity, he registers app user. That's a model that he made up. His user object is going to look like that app user. You go to app user. This is it. It's got first name, last name, default location is deleted, and then some properties here that say this is the foreign key. This is more for entity framework than anything else. But this is, you can, if your user has 50 properties, great. You know, you're building your own storage repository, you're storing it. That's all good. The base class here, identity user, and it says that it's got a unique ID. It's ID.
Hint.
As opposed to the use
String, right.
This is heavily documented, and in this project, you'll find some views, your login and stuff.
Yeah, you'll have login views, right? And on the API server, right? So I have an auth. Don't do that. Login, logged out, and log out and logged out. Right? And I can demonstrate that. But this is switching over to the API server. And this is how you basically wire up the two to talk to each other, right? So then now the API server is talking to the identity server to validate the tokens that I'm passing across, right? And you basically say, what is the authentication protocol that I'm using? Bearer tokens. And then I tell it the URL and whether or not that I'm going to require HTTPS. And in this case, we're in development, so I don't want to. And then I configure some core stuff. But since I don't want to configure it, I'll just allow everybody. That's it. That as far, other than the package, right? To the NuGet package, which is.
So it still has some access to token.
And that's it, right? So then you just wire it up and magic happens.
So .NET Core is pretty, I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure just baked into it. OAuth or OpenID. You don't need nothing, very little here is specific to the fact that we're using that identity server.
So really just wanted to go over that so you kind of have an idea of what's going on behind the scenes when all of this stuff is being transferred around, what that long URL is all about, and then sign in and sign out. Why is it bouncing me all over the place? And it's more just for the security of it, right? So that the identity server knows who's in and out. And you can wire this up to if somebody logged, you cancel the token on the identity server, you can have it basically log everybody out of their sites. So there's ways to do that. So if I wanted to log you out from the server side, I could do that. There's a plugin you would need to put in here to do that. So on to the Angular side. Yeah. Let's go to the only packages that you would need to get on the Angular side, the OpenID to work is this one, right? That's the only one that you need. All the other stuff that's in here, you know, Redux, Angular material, or any of those is just kind of stuff I imported to make stuff pretty and store stuff in a client store on Redux. Let's see. So we'll start off with kind of how I built the flow for this and to make it work is in the app component on init, I have this auth service that I created, and we'll dive into that in a second. Basically, I have a method on there that I call configure authentication. And this is where I talked about centralization of security functions. Was putting everything into an auth service in one location. And if you're familiar with Angular, I inject that into the app module at the very core root level. So it's only ever instantiated at the first time you run the app, and then it sits there. It's kind of like a singleton in the sense that it's only going to get instantiated once, and then I can inject it into multiple rebuilt, right? So it's always sitting there. So in this app service, this is where we're talking about configuring that OAuth service. So the OAuth service, I import from the Angular 2 OAuth NPM library, and I also import this JW tokens validator that they provide. And then I configure it, right? So all I'm doing here is all that stuff I showed you on the back end of the identity server, I'm mirroring that on the opposite side, so the inverse of it, right?
These two libraries are not related. It's not like identity server people provided this OAuth service. These are two completely separate. One's about identity server, you get some other people with this thing. They just both conform to the same standards and enforce the same security, so they have a lot of the same settings.
Right. Well, they're following the OpenID protocol, so right. We add the token validator. So this authority URL is, again, kind of like we did on the other side. I built an injection token to pull URLs out of the environments so that when I deploy to a dev environment, I get the right URL. So that's what's going on there. And then I say this is the sign-in location. I tell it the location of where my silent refresh HTML is, and I'll show you a little bit of that later. And then the log out redirect URI, which is basically myself, right? And then you remember from before, I said, here's the client ID. This is important. This has to match, and these have to match, right? Exactly, or you will not get logged in. You will get bounced out. This setting here is whether or not it's the hash mark in the URL from the old Angular. You can clear it after login or leave it. In this case, I don't care because, and I'll show you later, I do a redirect so fast you never see it. Here I'm just logging out stuff that's happened. And in this case, this is where the work is done. So in OpenID Connect, there's a discovery document on the ID server, right? The identity server. That's a well-known document of the well-known endpoints for the identity server. This is one of the ways you log in is you have to go load the discovery document so it knows all about the identity server. And then these are using promises, so I couldn't do it with observables. But if after that happens, after I load the discovery document, and this is kind of where this tricky little flow came in, I try to log in. So basically what it's saying is, do I have a valid token? Did I get a valid token? And this is all, remember, this is all happening in an app component. So the very start of the app, I'm always checking to see if you have a valid token, right? If I have a token received, call a method in here called I'm authenticated, right? Then, so if this didn't get called, we move down to the next then, right? Where I say, if I don't have a valid token, I don't have a valid, basically init the implicit flow, and this is the OAuth NPM library saying, I know what to do. I'm going to build this giant URL and redirect you over to the identity server, right? And you just say, where do I want to return to? And I say, give me back the same location. You could do something here where you would inject the return URL if you were on a page or somebody requested a page and they weren't logged in. This is where you could put that to have it go redirect them to the right page. Otherwise, I have a valid token. I am authenticated. I need to start the session. In this case, it's something that I created, right? And then if the session is timed out and the event gets raised, listen for it, and then sign out, right? And then for the OAuth service, I need to say, go ahead and set up the automatic refresh, right? Tell it that I want to refresh tokens on the back end silently. And so this authenticated method here is this one here, and all it's doing is basically raising an event. For those of you who aren't familiar with observables, who's familiar with observables? Right? Good number. So basically, I'm just raising that observable event to anybody who's listening. I'll show you where I'm listening to that later. And then a bunch of other stuff in here, like add roles, get the display name, get the bearer token. Right, this is where I'll go to the OAuth service and get the access token. Then sign out, check to see if they're authenticated, and build an auth user that I can store that's so I don't have to keep going back to the OAuth service and every other class. I just use this one and kind of wrapped it up to make it my own. What's that? Yeah.
That just wants it to come back to where they currently are. So if a user redirects to a page, say if a person has a shortcut save, a bookmark, and they put the bookmark, they go here, this whole initial process is going to kick off. It's going to redirect to the identity server. And then once they authenticate successfully, bring it back to it, which is pretty common.
Yeah, but my question is, in identity server, you specify what the return URL is successful.
Right, and it's going to come back.
Change the return URL as you like, because identity server cannot return to any redirect URL whatever you are specifying.
Right. And I think in that case you're right. I think I was thinking of state, where I would pass state back to the identity server. So I think in that case you're right, where it would be that's the one that has to match with those two have to match, right? So in this case, the return URL that I said was going to be this auth callback, right? So this is where I'm going to send the token back to this page in the Angular side. The app component is going to start up and do all that work from before, and then find that it has a token, right? And then call that unauthorized observable and say, hey, I'm authorized. If you just so happen to be on the auth callback page when all of that happens, and it happens, you know, all at the same time, then this unauthenticated gets called, and then we route you to the start page, right? So I could go and grab state from the OAuth service that I passed along if I wanted a return URL and redirect them to that one instead of the home page here. So that's the whole cycle. Is we go to log in, we try to log in with that, it goes to the identity server, comes back to this auth callback page that does with that in conjunction with the app component, work together to get you logged in, right?
The interaction with the API, but the identity server is not an API call, it's a full API call.
Yeah. So in that case, we've come full circle back to here, and now we're logged in, and now we have a bearer token, right? Well, how do we get that bearer token in Angular 5 so that back to the APIs? So at one point, Angular was using HTTP injectors, and then they went away from HTTP injectors, and now they're back to HTTP injectors. So we use the HTTP injectors.
You would use Swagger. You have use NSwag. We're big. NSwag is an open source tool, generally in the Microsoft space, but we use it to generate TypeScript. So if our API supports Swagger, which we do, we turn that on our API. Not showing that. And we use it with third parties too. APIs aren't even right. A lot of third parties that we work with that have their own APIs, they expose Swagger docs. So I can go and see what they do. We run a command line tool called NSwag. We point this command line tool at their API, and it looks at their API, read started on, generates a full TypeScript API proxy. Or it generates CSharp if you're not that person. We're doing a mobile app in Xamarin, we'll generate CSharp PCL proxy client. We run NSwag constantly. If somebody adds one method to an API, the person working on TypeScript runs NSwag against the API and sees it. It generates all the necessary models for the inputs, the outputs, everything for you. The only thing it doesn't do is the bearer token.
So,
is it Swagger specific or is it OpenAPI? So it's existing on OpenAPI throughout the Swagger, but had to have the Swagger tools.
We use Swagger. We use on our .NET side. We use a C# library called that. We use a NuGet package for NSwag.swagger, I think. So we can add special attributes. I don't know if it's OpenAPI at all.
Because I've been looking for a tool that does what you described, but I want to be specific.
Yeah, I do not know.
yeah, I don't know.
We love it. Our velocity is extremely fast. We rename a parameter, run NSwag, boom, all the TypeScript. If it breaks or it works, it's updated. We add a property to an object, we get this back immediately.
So, yeah, just to demonstrate, these are all the API endpoints I have for this particular demo. So let's go back over here. So grabbing that bearer token and putting it on every request, even though I'm running, like he said, we gen up our TypeScript code for all the clients, right? So I just point the NSwag tool, and it goes through and generates this file, right? And it, as you know, if you're using generated files, you don't touch them because at the next generation it's going to get overwritten. So you can't really extend this in any way, right? So it's kind of a nice feature here that we can use this auth interceptor to intercept traffic going to our APIs and inject our token. And this is just simple code, and I just send bearer tokens with every request. I don't check to see if I need to send it, but I do if the token is invalid, like, or we don't have a token and I happen to be on a page that I don't need to be authorized for, then I'll just send the request through, not stop it. But in this case, you see, I just grab, I create a little a string here with bearer and then the token, right? And I have that method from the auth service before where I say, go get me that token. And all that's doing is grabbing that from the OAuth client and returning it, right? And then I clone the existing request and then add my headers that I want in there, the authorization header with this bearer token. and then report progress is true, and then continue on. And the observable world saying next handle request, keep going on. This piece down here is just to register it with Angular so that it can be used, right? It's stored in session, right? I could store it in memory, but in this case I didn't need to because the OAuth service is already doing it for me. So I didn't want to recreate the wheel by...
Go back to that OAuth service. You have a line that dictates that. Right?
That dictates...
Where you store it. You set up this.
Yeah.
OAuth service. That's right. In here, one of the settings.
Right. You can, I mean, I can say this.
Yeah. Maybe you didn't set it.
Storage, I think.
That set storage.
I could put one in here. I could basically create an OAuth storage object and tell it that I want to use local storage instead of session, right? But in this case, it's using session by default. And I don't have a problem with it. So that's why I created this wrapper class, so that I don't have to keep going back to that. I just go to my auth service class to get whatever I need, right? So get bearer token, and then I do some handling there of returning null and moving on. I hate that this thing doesn't have tabs. I keep going back and forth. So then when you see that traffic and then that call to the API will always have this bearer token in there. The flow then happens on the back end to validate the token. So when I said before that you can't secure a single page application, but what you can do is secure your APIs. And that's what you should be doing, right? You should be securing your APIs to the nth degree, whether it be role underneath that, validating that even if they have the role, that person has rights to data, right? So secure the APIs is of the utmost importance. Securing your Angular app is more of a UI experience, in my opinion. You're just hiding and showing things based on what roles are. So let's see, let's talk about routes. So in this case, in my demo, I kind of wanted to go through and say, if I showed you before, the user is logged in, you know, he has access to the today's and the affiliates, and I only created 2 endpoints here, and he could delete, right, add, edit, you know, if he clicks delete, he can do all these things, but I'm going to pretend like I don't want this user to be able to do anything with affiliates for the first part of this demo, and basically shut them off, right? So how would I do that in the Angular world? There's the way I like to do it is I like to create an authentication guard and an authorized guard. So, and this is using the Angular routing. And the authentication guard, its sole purpose is to just say, does this person have a valid token? I'm not going to check roles. I'm just going to see whether they're authenticated in this case. So I might not want to lock down a certain route and leave it open. And I can show the route here. Like up here, I have authenticating route. That's where we come back in. I want to display a little pop-up that says, hey, we're authenticating. The sign-in, we're not blocking that one, but the login, I want to make sure they're at least logged in before I log them out, right? So I want to make sure they have a valid token, right? And so I create one for just validating the token, and the other one is I validate their roles, right? So since I passed roles down as part of the claim, I'll get a list of them, and then I can validate against those roles. And basically, it's the same thing. And in guards, you either can activate or you can activate children, and I implement both. so that I can use them on both levels, right? I don't have to create one for each. And in this case, I just say, look for this particular, on this route, this data attribute called authorize. If it doesn't exist, assume that they're authorized and they can continue on. If it does exist, go check and see if they have that role in the list of all the roles that I provided from the token. So in this case, right, you can see on this route, under the children, I'm lazy loading the module, but I can still lock down that whole So I can still lock that whole thing down by saying that in order to get there, this user needs to have the role or permission affiliates read only, right? So once that reloads,
if you're not familiar with it, you can pass custom data by routing into, if you pass that in, when you
so now, let's see if I open up this, go to console. See if I can do this. I'm gonna kind of get it on there. If I'm clicking on this, right, but I'm not going anywhere, right? The Angular site is now checking that. One, I've passed I have a valid token because I'm logged in, but I'm not passing I don't have the permission. I'm authenticated, but I'm not authorized, right? So it'll allow me to click on it all I want, but it's blocking that route navigation before it even happens, right? So I'm not actually even loading that module lazily. But what that doesn't do is make for a very good user experience, right? So a way that I like to do to improve the user experiences is I create a directive that takes the same information in, right? So I say, I need these roles to access this component, right? So I'm going to lock down this particular component, and so you can't get access to it. And so in this case, I have side nav component that I've written that renders out a menu based on some stuff. And you can see in here I have the directive and the menu item authorize, right? So here's the class I'm using to render out that side nav. And there's 18 million ways to skin this cat. I kind of like this one for ease of use. But I basically say, all right, if that person doesn't have the role here, then don't even render that component, because that directive would then stop the rendering of it. So now you can see that menu item is completely gone. So I've locked down the route from authorization. I've locked it down by authentication, and now I've just hidden it from you based on your role, all coming from the same auth service on the back end, right? So any questions on those pieces?
How are the roles integrated in the data?
So they
does the Angular OIDC package store the role?
So the roles are a claim that I provided back to the identity server on the identity server side. So it's not an OpenID thing. I can create any claim I want and stuff it in there, right? And it will get serialized into that JWT token. So if anybody tried to tamper with that token and add themselves to a role, it would fail, right? So it may pass when it gets to the API server and say, oh, he's got the role because it says it's in his claim. But once that claim, that token gets passed all the way back to the identity server, it will fail because it won't match the hash, right? So it's going to check that the nuance and the hash and validate that this thing hashes to the same. And
that client-side MDM library decrypts them and gives them back to you as a list of roles.
Right. Makes it,
the terms are interchangeable somewhat. In terms of OpenID, it's all claims. Everything, OAuth is all claims. But to us, we think security goes, you have rights to these things, or you're in this role.
Right. So yeah, think of a claim as a permission, right? So I have or a piece of metadata that I have access to, right? I'm claiming that I am Jeff. I'm claiming that I work at ArchitectNow. I'm claiming that I'm in these roles, right? That's what a claim is.
And he's using them here because they're in the Java token. Java is how you pronounce it in a conference a while back. Don't know why, it doesn't make any sense, but you have access to them on client side. Show them how you can turn off all the UI in the affiliate screen itself, like the ad.
Right, so that was where I was going to go next, but I was going to.
You also have access, since you're sending that bearer token, in the API itself, you have access to that. You can turn certain methods on or off based on role. You can allow the caller to get into a method that, and then get the claim and use the claim to dictate, filter your data or something like that. If they could still make the call, but instead of getting 100 rows back, they should only get 20 rows back of data, whatever that might be, you can do it that way as well. So you can use those claims, server-side, client-side.
Right.
Josh. J-O-C. We had a guy here at DevUp this year gave a session, a very good session actually. I learned a lot about that. But he started out the session with pronunciation, which I found fascinating. But did not know that, but I validated it with a few people. They were all like, right, you should have known that. I should have known.
Basically what I did here is I threw my user into the role that I needed to access the affiliates, right? So if I sign out, continue, and then sign back in, that role, you'll see, will come back across.
If you would have just left it for 300 seconds, you would have done that.
No.
Because
it doesn't reset the claims. It only checks the identity. Right? That you're still a valid ID, right? So you'd have to. It'd be like you're on a Windows machine and somebody changed your role in Active Directory. You don't get it until you log back and log back. Log out and log back in. So now I've given him that role back, and he can go navigate to that route. But you can still click on the delete, right? So I just posted a delete method to back to the server, to the API. And I wanted to do this so that I can kind of drill that point home as you secure your APIs, right? So if you didn't lock down your delete method, somebody had access, found a way to get to this, started clicking buttons, or found the URL of your client, started getting into Postman, testing all of these out with with maybe a valid bearer token, but just say, hey, I know there's some endpoints over here. I'm going to go see if I can delete some stuff and wreak havoc, right? So we can do the same thing, or I can go through, wrong one. It's this. And I went through here and kind of commented everything out and said, this is where I want to add them. Copy. Yeah.
The identity token back to the server.
Oh, it's already embedded in that.
They're going to re-embed it as they go back.
Well,
The whole
sent,
token
right?
contains
Everywhere the token
everything.
is sent, the claims can be- that token is encrypted as a 2056 hash, but it's still, the minute the server gets it, the server knows how to decrypt it, and then it has a list of claims. In addition to the identity that the user, all the other information embedded in the claims or client can also access it. As long as we keep that token in memory, we can get these.
So in addition to like the authentication, the identity token also has everything.
No, the identity token doesn't have the other. It just identifies.
Yeah.
But we get the claims back first, and that's why I have to log out.
Yeah, it's some
And they're embedded in there and hashed in a certain way. So if you change any of that token, like if you decrypted it and even base 64 and de-encode and break it apart and get it back into text, change something and then put it back, it won't match. Right? It's changed since it was handed to you, so it will fail. So what I just did real quick was basically the same thing I did on the route and that other, and saying you need to be in the affiliates role to get access to this, not affiliates read only. So you need a higher role or permission in this case. And I wanted to leave one undone because on the API side, I wanted to.
Would you refresh if you want to look at your certain parts of the UI turned off?
Right.
We just created a directive that wraps anything, any markup. You can add the authorize directive an array of rules. It will hide or show anything when you're not that directive knows how to use the common authorized service. So he's got that.
Right. And then I'm just tagging the header here, a button over there.
He's got the asterisk in front of it, just like all other Angular 5 directives, potentially destructive. Changing the back.
So I wanted to leave that one open because on the back side here, this is the .NET way of saying, hey, in order to get to any method in this class, you need to be authorized, right? So you couldn't get to this. If I went to there with Postman and tried to hit this endpoint, it would give me a 401, right? Or I can come back here over to the Swagger side. These are all locked down, and I could say, hey, I want to delete, and I know there's one in there with ID 1, right? And I try it out, I get a 401, right? So I'm not authorized to do that. So that's just saying that I'm not authorized, right? Or that I am authorized. But what's nice about having the API server and the identity server connected is that now I can say, hey, I still want to authorize. It's still going to validate that JWT token with that authorized, but I can also narrow these down by scope, right? So I want to say that, sure, you can go get a list if you have read-only. Hey, stop popping up. In the same way all the way down, right? For a put, I want them to have, they need the affiliates role. For the post, I want that, and for delete, right? Make sure this restarts. I'll run it myself. And so the whole point of that was to show you now, you don't have to. So now I've gotten a list, right? I'm allowed to go there because I have the role, right? But now if I click delete, you'll see that I get a 403 forbidden. So I can't emphasize enough that lock down your APIs, right? So even you might make a mistake on your Angular side and leave something available for them to click on, destructive like a delete. But if you lock down your APIs, then that user can't get to them. Right? Yeah, I could go through and change it, right, and show that button, or actually execute that via Postman, right, and grab the bearer token and try to do it. So that's why I say you can't ever really secure your
And assume your source code.
right. You're handing it to the nefarious guy on the other side. Assume everybody wants to break and hack your site. So code that way, right? So protect your APIs. But don't make it easy for them either, right?
Turning those buttons off.
Yeah. Right, so then I would just hide those two buttons. And so now from a user experience, it doesn't look like he has permissions to do anything. You can look at him, you could get one. If I had a display view, I could do that. He would still be able to get, but any destructive editing, I've locked him down from that. That's pretty much it. I mean, if there's, as far as locking down routes, locking down components, and then creating guards and using interceptors for the bearer token.
The guards and the directives are all nice to have. Like, extremely useful. If you've ever done this manually, or you just end up putting a lot of injects and a lot of code in your components that are like, am I read-only, am I not? A lot of ways to do that. This way is as easy as any. It only really works if you've got centralized security in an auth service or security service, whatever you call it. Something it's registered in Singleton in your component tree in Angular. Maintains state, if who's logged in, he's got his name up here. It's pointing at all the rows, the claims, whatever you call them. If you log out, we simply clear the memory of that component. And we go to the identity server and tell it to clear its own stuff because for performance reasons, it caches its own stuff. But then you're logged out. And then you refresh and take that and log in.
Yeah.
We have a question online. Can you revisit how and where the roles from the GPT are protected and used in Angular?
So does this person want to see it from the identity server side?
I think more on the
Client side.
Where they come down.
Yeah, where they come down, where you're breaking them out.
Yeah, show the give roles method.
Right. So this is. So they come down from the JWT token, right? And then you'll see I just kind of dump them out here onto the screen. And these are all the ones that well-known come down with the standard protocol for OpenID, but I've added a few, right? I've added my given name, email, and roles. And so, and from the Angular side, let's see what's this? So I build the auth user from the identity claims. And so where does this build auth user get called? Let's find it. Let's see right here. And what we're doing, we're just saying from the auth service, we go get the identity claims. And behind the scenes, this thing is decrypting the token, stripping out, and just giving you back all of those claims as an object. And I use the type any here because, I don't know, I might have added something else next time, and I don't want it to break. So I just use, I don't want to hard code anything here, because that way I can be a little more flexible. I know people don't like using any, but in this case, I thought it was nice. And so then I just grab from the identity that object, that property called role, and then stuff it into here. And it happens to be an array of strings. So, does that answer that question? Yeah.
But it's a very specifically named role. And you get it from that's also you serve. You do that. I guess you wrote your own directive, you wrote your own guard.
Right, and that's, you know, I that's why I created that central service, so I could call it from the directive, I could call it from the guards, I could call it from the app component, and I don't have to keep reusing that auth service component over and over and over again and rewriting code. So it's more of a code reuse tool in this case. So did that answer his question? Yeah. Anyone else?
There's a lot of moving parts in it. And the moving parts differ depending on, like, we showed a lot of identity server in .NET back with Java and using Facebook auth. They're going to be similar. The terms are going to be similar. The steps are going to be similar. The whole interaction of the APIs or whatever you're authenticating against is going to be similar, just slightly different technology, slightly different.
Right, and I don't know if this is true or not, but my understanding is that Google, maybe the other guys are moving away from OpenID Connect, and they're moving more towards strict OAuth. But I don't know if that's true.
OAuth is very similar.
Right.
They're just slightly different protocols, vying for the same. I know Microsoft is big OpenID.
Yeah.
Still are.
What's the real meaningful difference between the two?
That would be Google it. Because it's
not enough to really matter to anybody except us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they kind of they're kind of interconnected, from my understanding.
And like I mentioned early on, we don't do this in all of our apps. You work with some apps that did very similar stuff, had a lot of the same type of directives, had security service, centralized stuff in Angular, but on the back end, we didn't use a third party or external identity. We say rolled our own, but that's the term that you generally use, right? We had a user database, and we had roles. We still used ASP.NET Core security to manage them. We still generated our own JOT tokens and sent them around, but we were responsible for using some .NET plumbing to generate a JOT token and add our own claims and send it down to the client. We were responsible in the client for decrypting and doing something. In this world, there's just a lot more plumbing. Other people want to solve those issues and they give them to do it.
Right. And I mean, I could see, I'm sure there's probably NPM packages out there for Facebook and Google to OAuth against or authorize against to use on Angular 2, or Angular 5 in this case. But I could see you if you wanted to wrap this up and have Facebook being the identity provider, and you get back a token from them, storing it in your whatever Mongo, SQL, Postgres, whatever you want to store it in, and then just sending your own token across. I could see you doing that and then wiring it up for OpenID if you felt so crazy enough to do that. So you could keep your Facebook token secret.
Questions? Stunned silence?
Oh my gosh.
Rarely, I can't think of any Angular app that we've built in the last few years that isn't secure. At least I would say over half. Some maybe half. But I say that, some of them are consumer facing where we might have a significant render fast. Nobody needs to log in. If you're logged in, great. If not, maybe some functionality goes away. You're not. For the most part, other apps are 99.99% secure as well. You don't want anybody in unless they go through and have all of this plan.
What if, let's say you have to integrate with some other API platform. You're building a platform, but you're collaborating with this company that has their own set of data, this company that has their own. You can't really guarantee that you like to tell them, hey, you need to lock all these APIs down. We need to make sure that all of our roles and everything match. You can't assume that that's going to happen necessarily. What extra steps or measures would you try to take, or is there any really on the client side to just handle that extra layer of uncertainty?
So I would probably, in that scenario, I would probably pull and call their APIs from the server side so that I could secure them on my side, at least from the Angular side, right? And then call from the server their APIs from a wrapper of some kind that I created. So at least I could say from my app, you can't get to these endpoints, but
there are some, we integrate with a ton of third-party APIs, and they all do it differently. A lot of them do a lot, some just don't provide you an API key, and you just keep using that key. I quit paying my bill for their API, they turn that off. Some I don't go back through, like I'll go there for search, I go straight sockets to them, I use their JavaScript library. Stripe now requires that a lot of stuff on the server will write to them, how you bounce through yours.
Right.
Cosmic, we use a API for content management. It's like a headless content management system. So instead of using WordPress sites, we use Cosmic. Our users can go in there and manage their own front end, like homepage text or whatever. We just go to them and get data back for the homepage. We don't route back to us and over to them. But those are less secure areas of data. Their API is really made for a scenario, a JavaScript scenario, where we bounce straight to them. We're not trying to share security. This stuff would only if we really wanted to share security.
Yeah.
Share rights would be needed to integrate with this way, as opposed to just call them.
Any other questions or anything?
That's your easy crowd.
Yeah.
Like, can you show them where this is? You want to look through this code? You have, I mean, if you want contact information, we will make sure you have that. If you have any questions outside of here, you can put this up on the meetup site, we'll share emails.
I think this is the public one. 2 hours ago. Yeah, this is it.
Yep. We're happy to answer any questions you have if you walk out of here and think, man, that was confusing. So I wish they had said something. And I was just too shy to ask. Give us an email. We'll share contact information on the email. And